So, seeing how this is going to be a little while before anything else interesting comes around, I might as well go ahead and talk about something that I mentioned before, and I figured to kill some time before something new comes in. Why don't we go ahead and do some filler content that I think would be interesting? So, if you haven't seen this video here, which is my review of the last one, which was, I believe, the Bride of the Living Dummy, I made a mention of something that I'm assuming not a lot of you have seen because not a lot of people watch those reviews, but I'll give you the long and short of it if you haven't. Basically, I made the announcement that as of event 24 and up, I'll be separating them in their own separate categories. Seeing how they're starting to become more smaller and not the same as it used to be for the big ones, it'd be unfair to kind of compare them to the newer stuff. So because of that means from event 1 to 23 is basically completed, and I'm calling them the big events, as it were. So, in that kind of case, I figured why better way to have a reflection of all the events that we had thus far and give you my overall thoughts on each one. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about it. Both the best and worst top 10 events that we have thus far. But you might be thinking then, well, Grim, if I'm not mistaken, there's 23 events, and yet you're going for top 10 best and worst. That means 3 events are going to be out, not concluded. So, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? I thought you were going to talk about all of them. And I am. What's funny about this is that, believe it or not, there's actually 3 events that I'm going to be excluding from this list for certain reasons. And I'm going to explain my reasonings to you. So, with that in mind, why don't I go ahead and talk about the 3 events that I'm going to take out of the list and give you my reasoning why, to make some sense. As well as talk a little bit about it so you have a better understanding. So let's talk about the first event that I want to get out of the way, and that is this. That's no Easter Bunny. The first ever event we have in 2018. Now, the reason I'm taking this off the list is because although I did play the beta version of this, like the first ever version of this thing, I don't have video footage of it, nor did I play the actual official event when it came out back in June, July. And you can pretty much seen that because I'm borrowing Casey Loves Gaming because he's the only one who actually had footage of this event, as it were. And I did mention this during my other review for the for the other That's No Easter Bunny. But the long and short of it is that this was a magic event. It introduced Amazo. And honestly, to tell you the truth, this whole event was interesting, but I felt like because I didn't really play the official one, that it would be unfair for me to give my overall thoughts on where I should place this here and there, which makes sense, right? So that's my reasoning of excluding this one from the list. Now then, we got that out of the way. Let's go for number 2. Valentine Night Fever is the second one I'm excluding from this list. And you might be thinking, why am I excluding this one in particular? I thought this event was somewhat interesting, and I liked it. It was one of the ones I loved, and you're right, it was. But here's my reasoning behind it. Although I love the idea that they decided to kind of have a thriller theme to this, the problem is that this wasn't really an event. It was a half event because the main theme or the topic of it was Werewolf Fever Swamp, which was a permanent content. And after the event ended, all the exclusive like zombies and even Will Blake himself ended up going into different places that they should be put into. So basically making this null and void, almost to the point where it's like, why even bother with this? So in that context, it's not really an event, is it? It's more of a, hey, Valentine's here, so here's some Valentine's Day items, and we're also releasing a love story. In this case, it's the Werewolf of Fever Swamp update. So yeah, here you go. And a little sneak preview of what's coming up next with Courtney King and why she's involved. But I digress. Anyways, besides that, everything's good for that. But that's my reasoning for leaving this one out of here. Now then, you might be curious on my last thing I'm taking out of the list. Well, you probably may already give a good guess what it is. But if you don't, it's this. Shop Till You Drop Dead. If you've seen my videos or you're familiar with my channel, you probably have a good idea why I'm excluding this. But just to say you are not familiar who I am, or the content or the videos I've done, or seen any of my other extensions with this particular update, I'll give you the short of it. Long story short, I had involvement with this update, and I feel it would be a disservice and kind of a conflict of interest to kind of put something I had heavy involvement on a list of what was best and worst. Although I would be giving my honest takes on the thing, I think to make it fair, I should exclude this off of the list. And to go into details with this update, I've pretty much extended about of it, and I talk long enough with this update in particular, so I don't want to indulge you and bore you to the details of this stuff. So instead, I'll leave you with that out of the way, and we'll just simply say, you kind of have a good idea why I've decided to kick this off the list, but at least you have an understanding of that. That makes sense. Right, so those are the 3 events that I'm going to be excluding from this list. So, with that in mind, we got 3 out of the way. So now we have a good even 20. 10 good ones and 10 worse ones. And I figured let's go with the more exciting one and go for what is considered to be the top 10 worst big events this game has ever released, in my opinion. Now, before we continue with this thing, I want to go ahead and emphasize this. Although this is considered to be the worst ones, that they're not technically awful. They're just not as great as the other 10 good ones, if that makes sense. I will tell you when we get to the really awful ones. But for now, look at this list as not the worst ones, but not the best or the meh okay ones. That should be a better list of it, but you get the gist. So, with that in mind, let's talk about each one individually. Starting off with number 10. Trick or Trap. Yes, this one that introduced Curly, the third of our Halloween events, and one of them that I really did enjoy. But why, Grim? Why include this as one of the worst? Wouldn't it be great? You would think so. But as I remember or recall when I was playing this update, what I referred to it as was, how do I put this? It had everything going for it, and then it just tripped along the way. And there were a lot of fumbles they had, and a lot of mistakes had to be corrected during the updates, which had more incorrections coming into the game, which means more problems and issues and complications. So, because of this, I feel as though it would be less endearing to kind of go ahead and talk about how I feel like this should be fixed in some ways. So, in context, what did I like about this event? The fact is, I love the fact that they introduced Curly as a main character, that it was mainly focused on him, that you basically brought his twins, his sisters, which was like only mentioned once, and they actually gave them characters, life, and all that type of stuff. And then you go ahead and, we brought in Drool, which is his faithful sidekick and, character that was interesting from there. And other things as well alongside with this. But one of the other uniqueness of this update was the fact that it tried to bring Sam into or Sonny, I should say, into the limelight of trying to get him some flesh character out, kind of like what they did with Sam. And long and all, everything about it was pretty okay for the most part. It had a theme, which was mostly with Curly. The downside of this is the fact the main character himself was locked behind a paywall, and only getting him through a paywall. That's not the case now, but it certainly rubbed people off the wrong way. Not to mention, the other thing about this update, and what made it particularly odd, was the fact that the update Trick or Trap, although had characters like Lillian in there, didn't really have much of the story, but that's to be expected in 2020. It seemed to be very loosely based on things and just kind of had to be in name only. So, with flexibilities like that, I tend to kind of ignore it and kind of go, okay, whatever, I'll accept it as is and kind of live with it. But the glitches, the pumpkin, like the items themselves were kind of like, they were okay, but they weren't really extraordinary, like wow factor. One of the big things that kind of were like really disappointing was the pumpkin crafting thing, if you know what I mean, the evolution of that thing that didn't really produce a whole lot and kind of made it very sucky and useless, and it just got worse and worse. Only to the point where he even said, why not just give us haunted seeds? And then in the end, they just decided to give us the haunted seeds. Like, oh, now you finally give us that. But before, it didn't give us anything. It was just useless. Like, you craft this big thing, and it's just useless. But that's probably one of the other reasons why this is so down. But again, it's only 10, so that means it barely was underneath it just because of some lackluster stuff. This could be one of the top best ones, but again, because of certain things that happened during this update, I feel like it would be a disservice to kind of include this as one of the best, because there were a lot of problems with this one. And I feel like because of it, it just didn't add up to the whole thing. And yes, really the haunted Jacko was just, it was a disappointment. It was an interesting idea. I love the idea of what they had and going for it, and I thought it was kind of cool. But because of it, we kind of lost some interesting items alongside that could have been more better. But it's what it was. Now then, let's go to the 9th, or let's go to the next one, which is number 9. It came from the internet. The second anniversary update, and what an interesting idea for an update. This kind of futuristic internet kind of 90s type of theme, especially with one of the weird books that give yourself goosebumps that not a lot of people might be familiar with. And they kind of make a theme around it too, with the characters I introduced and all that type of stuff. It was interesting with how they brought everything together. But my problem with it when it first came up was it was so lackluster. It seemed incomplete. It seemed rushed. It seemed like it wasn't fully there. Some grammar errors and things are just not completed, or it seemed like it was almost rushed in a sense. And from behind the scenes, I can tell you that there were reasons why things happened the way they did. And partially it could be because of the pandemic that happened and things were changed of how they got information across, because they were working remotely versus inside the studio. So because of that, things could have been miscommunicated, and thus the mess we see today. But I still, despite everything about it, I love the charm of it. It just, from the story of how wacky it is to everything about it, it just screamed charm. It kind of irked me that it felt so incomplete, because like Trick or Trap, this could be one of the top ones. Like it had some good items, it had some interesting ideas, but I think the execution is what was the issue. Like, when people saw that the graveyard cake was the grand prize, they were wondering why. Yeah, it made sense that it was the second anniversary, and hence, you get a cake for it. But as far as theming around the internet and kind of the internet arcade, kind of that type of theme, it didn't feel like a grand prize to fit with the event, if you know what I mean. So because of that, it was kind of confused and miscommunicated and all that type of stuff. And it got brought back next year, before they ended up going to the hiatus period, where they brought it as one of the special books. And from there, they corrected a lot of mistakes from the inside story. They added new lore to it, as well as other interesting things about it that just was unique about it, the cases and all that type of stuff. So again, they've corrected a lot of mistakes from there, and because of that, it kind of made me feel like it was somewhat interesting. And a lot of people think I was too hard on it, and I kind of was. But again, I had to be honest with it during the time, because it was just, it was almost there, But the way it was handled, the things that they did with it, it didn't work. And a lot of it was just kind of rushed and was incomplete, and was kind of the same kind of thing that happened with number 10, but not in the same vein. At least number 10 was fully completed. It just fumbled. This one was that there was a good idea there, but it just lost in execution, and it just was a mundle mess because it wasn't fully complete. It was almost half-baked is the thing I went for. In fact, I don't know if I called this the worst update of 2020. I'm trying to think if it was. I'm trying to think. I think I did, which felt wrong for me to say because it's not the worst one. But honestly, the only reason I did that was because there was it just felt incomplete. But thinking about it long haul, there was a lot more charm to it, and the characters introduced and all that stuff. There were, interesting stuff with it. And personally for me, I had no problems with it. So that's why it's here at this number. So that's the long and short of it. So that completes that one. Let's go to the next one, which is number 8. The Haunted School. This has got to be one of the more creative things they've done to this book. And despite the fact that it's number 8 on the list of worst ones, I want to go ahead and just gush over some of the things they went with the decision. One of which was the villain, Chameleon. I love how they took this random character that was just mentioned, it just was a MacGuffin character, and they basically made him into this boogeyman monster, and kind of like a Venom in a sense. And it just had charm to it. The story was well done as well. And you got Thalia, which was an interesting character as far as the main star goes, as far as this book. And the character design of her actually is really well done. It falls true to the source material. And even the prize itself kind of related to it as well. Almost fits well with the theme. And everything about it just seemed really good for the most part, especially since the theme of it to be, school. Usually those types of things don't really add up very well to the whole idea behind it. But in hindsight, the reason why I feel like this didn't really do as well as it should have, namely comes down to the fact that the items included in this update were not the greatest. Now, part of it was because they had this gimmick where you'd put these gray buildings and gray walls and, this like monochrome items. And you'd bring them in there and turn it into colored ones. But the problem is you couldn't switch from one end to the other. So you only had the one to put down, and then that's it. And part of the story, you do had to basically turn them into color. So it would have been great if we had these two options here. It was an interesting idea. I do like the concept of it, but it would have been nicer to kind of have monochrome versus the colored versions of it, so that way you can just play contrast with one another. But it didn't really go well, if that makes sense to the whole thing. And I feel like some of the items they kind of included here could have been more interesting, but it was okay for what it was. It was just kind of the elements of like different items and whatnot just kind of turned into something else. Was just, it was lacking, if anything. But the other issue is Thalia herself being 12,000 of the event currency. This was a hard grind for a lot of players to get to. If you didn't want to pay her through a pack, then getting her in the freemium way was somewhat difficult. Hence why it was kind of put in the way it did. The other characters that were free during this time was at least achievable. Thalia was kind of hard. She wasn't difficult, but she was certainly a challenge. And honestly, I feel like because of this, it had some issues as far as things go. Now, like I said before, the items that were craftable, that included the story, the character chameleon, everything about this was just, again, had charm. Especially for a back to school update, really just surprised me. Especially the promenade was just beautiful. It's the way they kind of contrast from colored to monochrome. It just oozed personality. And this is one of the reasons I love this. But I feel as though there were some things that seemed missing from it. And because of that, I feel like it didn't deserve the amount of... it could have been something. But unfortunately, due to either lack of resources or items they kind of have, or just the way that was just kind of formed, it didn't really feel perfect to me. So because of that, I feel like number 8 was a perfectly good spot for this. And I figured as much, that this would actually fit well as far as the theme goes. But again, not a whole lot of bad that goes with this update. It's more so, could have been better, could have had more in there, but for what it is, it was alright. So, now we go on to number 7. That's no Easter Bunny. Now wait a minute, you might be saying, Grim. I thought you took off the That's No Easter Bunny event off there. I took off the first ever event that was back in 2018. This is the 2019 Revisited Special. I get, not really Revisited Special, but it's a revisited version. See, whereas the first one was more magic based, this one's more Easter based. And it included the character as the magical assistant, aka the real Amazo. This was more of a completed version of what we got for the first event, and I feel like this completed the story overall of what could have been. And I feel like at the time they didn't had all the things they wanted to do, so they re-put this back in, make it as a new thing, and kind of introduced it as a whole new obligation. Now, for people like me, this was great, because then I got to talk about the That's No Easter Bunny again, despite me not being able to cover it when I first came in, because I kind of came in late into 2018. And due to that, it basically helped me out, so I wasn't too bad with the whole kind of like, oh, we're doing this again, show, song, and dance. But, and it was mostly Easter themed, so it's not like magic based, like, oh, here we go again with the magic stuff. He's like, yes, these appeared before, so if you missed your chance, you can get them now. But they also introduced new Easter themed items, which actually made more sense to try to keep with the Easter theme. So instead of a magic carnival or magic show type of setting, this was more of an Easter carnival type of theme. So you had more interesting side plots and side quests to kind of go alongside this type of thing. The downside to this, though, was that this was basically a copy of something we've seen previously. Yes, they added new things to it. Yes, it was new in the sense that it didn't feel like a complication. Like, yes, it made it a little bit, despite the time we were given, we were still able to get what we needed to get, which was, like, surprising. But the thing is, there were some things about this update that could have fixed itself a bit better. One of the things was one of the quests in particular, if you know what I'm talking about, even it suffers to this day, that the magical assistant slash Amazo had this quest where you had to sell 3 certain items to Satyr. Now, the first item, no problem. It's the other 2 that you have issues with, because you have to play RNGesus in order to get lucky. And unfortunately with this game, as long as it's run now, the amount of items that come in are too much. So you're pretty much screwed in this type of trying to get things going. Not only that, but some of these items that kind of added here could have been a little confusing as far as how to craft things go. It was somewhat simpler, like it was easy enough to kind of like, it's not too difficult, but it was kind of intimidating for those who haven't played this for the first time. Or if you played this before, then it should be easy, but if you haven't for the first time, then there might be a lot of stuff here that might kind of encourage you not to take part in it because you feel like it's too overwhelming. And despite that, some of the aspects of this event was interesting as far as the theme goes. Like I said, this was an Easter-styled version, so it had some interesting ideas and thoughts to it, but at the end of the day, it was just seen before, and it felt like we could have had something better as far as an event goes. It's like, yeah, we had this before, but it could have been better. But I don't know. It's just, to me personally, it was good for what it did. I think because we had to play this again, I feel like this is why it's at the place that it is. But again, they handled it pretty well as far as having to play it again. So, despite the fact that we had to play this again, this was fine for the most part. So again, no big issues with it. It's just could have been better, in my opinion. But with that being said, let's go on to another version of this, another event, as it were, that I feel like should have deserved a little interesting retrospective. Number 6. Attack of the Christmas Presents. Now, this one was interesting because this was our first Christmas update we had, and a lot of us didn't expect this to be the theme to this update. A lot of us kind of expected they were going to do the 12 Screams Christmas because that was the only official Goosebumps story that was Christmas related. But we were surprised that they decided to go ahead and go to the more and more and more tales to give you goosebumps angle and give us some short stories into one big narrative. And this also introduced Claus, or Chris, as it were, a guy who pretended to be Santa Claus. So this was our evil Santa, as it were. And technically, although he did appear in the story, in a sense, not really. This isn't an original character, but you know, I digress. It was unique for what they did here, of what they were trying to do and everything like that. And I feel like this was also very well done as far as just the making it feel like it's Christmas and have spookiness in there, and the fact that they kind of took some of these short stories and kind of add them in there. And this was also the first time we actually got to see a little bit of that whole putting a little bit of the community inside this event, especially when it comes to what was it, Point Horror, I think it was, that they got mentioned with the whole Cookie Speedway zone. Yeah, that. But what was interesting about this too was I feel like part of the reason why it's in this list the way it is was some of the confusion that kind of came with this update. There were a lot of cool ideas, but I feel like it was just kind of not enough time to let it flow out. Namely, the Christmas crafting, the tree, as it were, to be able to craft this tree and grow and grow and grow. I think this was the first time we actually got to see something like this, and I thought this was an actually cool gimmick as far as like every time you make it grow, it gives you a better item. So later on, you kind of have this dilemma of, do I go and spend money on the items that I want, or do I save it up and craft the tree and be able to drop me better items to sell off? That was the kind of good idea aspect kind of thing, and a lot of us were new to this whole like thing, trying to figure out how things were supposed to go. That being the case, what was one of the more unique side to this was the fact that I feel like it was fine for the items they were kind of included. It wasn't like they had some scary items, yes, but most of it were kind of not fitting. I think one of my biggest complaint with this was that it wasn't Halloween enough. It wasn't really decayed. It was like normal-ish. Like it belonged from their other game, Snoopy's Town Tales. It's not a bad thing to have. It's nice to have some normalcy in a kind of town builders aspect of this event. But I feel like they didn't bother making it unique as its own, or it makes it fit in very quickly. Like the presents, for example, the main prize, as it were, yeah, the middle thing. I feel like they could have made it a little bit more spooky, but instead it looked like something you could fit in the Snoopy's Town Tales, right? And even the crafting shop doesn't even look spooky. The only thing that kind of fits is the Santa's throne, but the only reason that fits is because they had the Goosebumps emblem on the chair. If it didn't have that there, it looked like a normal thing. Like, again, the theme of Christmas is not bad. The items they include wasn't bad either. My issue with it was the items that were introduced were very non-Goosebumps HorrorTown feeling, if you know what I mean. There were some of them, yes, but I feel like a lot of it was just, let's take it from this other game and put it inside here. Hence why I feel like this kind of lacked the way it kind of did. And not all stories from that book was included in this update, so it wasn't really a celebration of the 10 spooky tales. It was more like maybe 6 of the classic ones and kind of added in there. And, you know, you got this cool picture of Marty as the like creepy werewolf type of character, and we don't really get to see him scaring Mar as in the form, so it kind of breaks the immersion a little bit. Now, later on in the years, we end up finding this version, so yes, it did came out eventually, but it would have been nice to see it happen here, if that made sense. And honestly, this was also the first time that this actually decided to make it simplistic, where they only had all the new crafting items in the crafting shop, so they don't use them in the Mystery Club or the Monster Diner anymore, which makes it more convenient. So it's like, alright, everything we need to know that's new is in this one area. That sounds good. So, again, they had decent ideas. I love the theme of it, but as far as everything else is concerned, I feel like there were some things that could have made it a little bit better as far as making it feel like it belongs in HorrorTown. Other than that, it felt like it was more... There was some spooky stuff here, but a lot of it just seemed like, oh, it's just Christmas stuff. It's just, you know, you could have put them into other games like Snoopy's Town Tale, and they'll feel just right at home. And I can tell you that some of the items, they did change it slightly from Snoopy's Town Tales, but not all of them. So, you know, like for example, one of the snowmen that kind of looked like it's evil and kind of grabbing you kind of thing, it's the same one that's in Snoopy, except they just made the eyes look more mad versus normal. So, it's kind of a cop-out, but at least they tried. So, again, with that aspect, I'm not too harsh on it. It's okay for what it was, but again, it's just... It could have been there. It could have fit with HorrorTown as well as be Christmas, but it just kind of felt like it was just lacking in some areas. Hence why I feel like it's placed the way it is. So, yeah, it's where it's supposed to be. And I feel like it's appropriate to put it there. I feel like it fits to be number 6 because it's not terrible, but it's not the greatest either. I think for a first time we had a Christmas update, it did its job, I think, but I feel like it could have done a lot better in some aspects, but I digress. So, now we're going to our halfway points with number 5. Welcome to Camp Nightmare. This was a bit of a hard one to kind of put in there. Much like why I feel like this one it was a little bit less better than, say, the Christmas version, was mostly due to some aspects to it. I will praise what I think I love so far. We got introduced to a new character, Saber. He was an interesting character that we went from a mythical monster that didn't exist in the books to a animatronic in the show to an actual beast character that had somewhat issues. Like a hermit, but, came out of his shell when he was hiding his true self from the people. My issues with this one is that we do have some cool, spookiness, old tents, right? We got the grand prize, which was fantastic. To bring the book as a prize was just, perfect. But then you get stuff like the scout statue for, 50,000 of the acorns. It was too ridiculous. But my issue with this update, partially too, was the fact that if it was just Saber, that would have been fine. But then we get Walter for 700 Goosebucks. Not worth the price. Why did you make him worth that much? I have no idea. And I feel like because of that, it deserves to be put in its place. That and the theme of camping alone. You know how I mentioned how there was some aspect of trying to fit, some of the items feel like it always belongs in Snoopy, and they didn't feel like they made it feel like it belonged in HorrorTown. This one is worst with this aspect, because besides the old tents, every other item we get here feels like it belongs in Snoopy, and they just put it into this update and say, there you go. No. It doesn't feel like it belongs here. It doesn't feel like HorrorTown, and that's my problem. The story, too, I feel like was lacking compared to the Christmas one. The Christmas one, at least it had some charm in there. At least it had some interesting ideas and some interesting lore and aspects and stuff like that. But the problem with this one was that it just kind of just ended. We had a mystery, we had a thing going on, and then it just ended, just right then and there, just done. Without any issues, problems, that's it. Just forget it. It was just a LARP. It just frustrates me. And partially this is why it's placed the way it is, because I feel like the items, everything about this frustrated me, because this could have been good as far as a spooky camp update is concerned. But it didn't seem like they had everything there. It seemed like they kind of put recycled stuff in here, throw it in here to make it fit, and then it's just there. It's just there. And the scene itself, say what you want with the Santa throne. At least they gave you, Christmas presents. They actually made an interesting attempt to try to make a unique, it's not, based off of the story. They actually made inanimate Christmas presents be these spider-like creatures with big mouths, and it's interesting like that. But then you get to Saber's cabin, and you would think, okay, maybe it just spawns Saber, right? No, it also spawns Saber clones. Okay, you couldn't have thought of something different? You could have thought of something more unique or interesting? I don't mind the clone bits, but you couldn't have other creatures of the night to kind of put into this aspect? Really? Just Saber clones? Like, just, it felt lazy, if anything. This whole update felt lazy in some aspects, and this kind of frustrated me. And partially, this was also the last update that the original director had involvement with before he left for his own endeavors. So, the fact of the matter is, this whole thing that happened here, the way it kind of had, was just, I don't know, it was just frustrating me, this is what it is. So at the end of the day, I just feel like it could have been something worthwhile, but it's not. So we just have to deal with what we got here, and live with it, and just be done with it. But, I'm in the theater there. There's not much else I can say with this update. It's just, it was what it was. Oh, there was one last thing. They had this cool fiery effect, like this animation thing going with the fire, right? And then halfway through, they decided to just get rid of it. Yeah, they just got rid of it. Despite the fact that they had fine with other animations before, but this one, no, they just had to get rid of it. They never brought it back. Why? Why did you do that? Like, did you really coded that so badly that you couldn't bring it back anymore? Like, you had issues with other phones, really? It's just, oh god, a lot of this stuff frustrated me. And and the problem of it is that it could have worked, but it just fumbled a lot, and it just probably, I think you get the gist of this. But oh boy, although this one had some issues, it's nowhere as problematic as number 4. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Oh, I am afraid, alright. And you might be thinking, wait, I didn't put this low before. Why is it this low now? Thinking about it, retrospective, and looking at everything that happened before it, I feel like it belongs at this position. And I'm gonna tell you why. A lot of this just pissed me off. And it sucks, because I was featured. I was turned into an NPC along with a fellow contributor and I would say an associate of mine, Erasmo. But everything about this update, just at first it was just alright, and then I thought about it, I looked at it, and I just think about it more, and I really just started to get more and more upset and more pissed off. Let me list the reasons. Firstly, the new characters, Zawid and Connor. Let's talk about Zawid first of all. He is a unique character. You can only get him through packs. Pretty bad enough as it is, right? Well, you think as a villain, he would stand out. And although he does kinda stand out, he has somewhat of an interesting personality, and yes, he had some sort of motive of sorts of what he does. He just, out of all the villains out there, he is the lamest one of them all. He could have been unique, interesting, and just everything about it. Just, I don't know what it is. He just seemed not there, you know? He just had some interesting ideas, and just it didn't come through. It just fell apart, if anything. It just didn't work out. And I don't know why, but it did. And it kind of just, I don't know how to say it. It just, God. But, Zawid is one thing. Connor, on the other hand, whew, boy, let's talk about him. He is, by far, hands down, out of everybody in this game, the most useless character out of every existence. And I don't mean in the sense of just anything as far as, what did you call it? God, he's pissed me off so much that I'm just trying to, okay, let's calm down. Let me explain one of the reasons why. Useless in a sense that it's not like he didn't drop any good items. He dropped okay items. He was worth 600 and something bucks. That's a lot. Not really worth it at the end of the day. Now, he came with 4 animation quests. Now, normally in a sense of that nature, you would think that it would be all unique, right? Wrong. They were the same animation recycled, except they changed the logo 4 times. You couldn't have just had that be one animation and had everything else be unique. Nah. Just recycle it 4 times. That is the worst thing I've seen thus far. It's bad enough that Rachel has just 1 animation. Heck, the Trigger and Cuddles has no animations. And there's a reason for that, but I digress. Everything about this it screamed laziness to me. And it just, everything about it. He is worthless as a character. He doesn't do anything with the story. Like, yes, he's the one who triggers it, but what made him be the special one? It could have been someone like Dustin, or like throw anyone else in his shoes, but much better. Connor is useless. Nothing about him stands out at all. He looks closely like Billy from Billy Deep. So it doesn't help that matters much. Everything about this kid, he just pisses me off. And now every time I come across a character, I always say it's been Connored. And you don't want to be a Connor. Nobody wants to be Connor. He's a worthless character. And then you get to the Jekyll Haunt. That was a worthless thing that had to be cost a lot of stupid currency. Like, really? You had to cost that much in order to get an item that you need in order to progress through the story and to get through getting the prize? You need this item, and it's hard to get. Like, you couldn't have made it, like, make it challenging, okay, but don't make it impossible. So then you get that, and then the cherry on top of this whole thing, all the items were just unique, except for one, which was the stairs. What are you going to do with stairs? I don't know, but you can make more stairs. Worthless stairs. And that's part of the reason. It's just like all these items are unique, and just you get one, that's it. And a lot of them seemed useless. I get the idea with the whole, it's an election year, so we have to have, like, posters of the different candidates. Okay, I understand that lore-wise. But I feel like for this update, you should have done something a little bit more interesting, you know? But no, let's make it political. Let's just make it just not fit at all. And the idea was an interesting idea in paper and concept, but the execution didn't work out, Chief. Not at all. And it pissed me off because I was included in this update, and they even went as far as to give me Zawad as a present, and I feel bad because this was really bad. Like, really bad update. In fact, I feel bad that in 2020 I didn't call this out to being the worst one out there, because honestly, at the end of the day, this is the worst one out there. And the worst part of everything about this was that I stated that unless you pay into this game, there was no way in hell, HE double hockey sticks, that you, the premium player, would be able to get the grand prize, which is the throne. And that's like, okay, it's an item that you can just get whatever. Except, in order to complete this quest, you have to get this item in the quest line. This brought the first time that this brought this stupid gimmick into this stupid thing. And here's what pisses me off about this too. Unlike the other ones, where that was the last quest, was to get the final grand prize, and which is like, okay, that makes sense. To finish the story, you get finished the completion, whatever. They fixed this in the other updates. But this one, no. There was another last quest behind this one that had an interesting plot twist that a lot of people would have loved to see, but never got to see it because of the stupid roadblock. The brought back horrible memories of an event that I will get to at some point. Don't worry. You know, if you know, you know. But, with that in mind, what also irked me about this was that there was an animation with Mrs. Johnson that gets unlocked at the end of the quest line that gives you one unique item, which was the horror crown, which was one of the items you needed in order to get the grand prize. But it's completely useless and worthless when you got the grand prize to get to this point. And what are you going to do with this crown? Sell it? Okay. And then what? Buy what? Stairs. More and more stairs. As I ranted before, I don't know what the hell was wrong with me. I should have called this out. This was indeed the worst update, and I am kicking myself, and I do apologize. I'm so sorry to the internet. You are not the worst. This is the worst one. And I'm glad I am finally calling out as it was. Now, with that in mind, although this is the worst of 2021, I don't think it's as bad as it goes as far as being worst categories. No. All the events I've talked about thus far, if they came back again, I would play them again. Even this one, to a lesser extent. I don't hate this one as much. But the next three. The next three. I have a bone to pick with them. Let's talk about the 3 worst updates this game was ever produced. Starting off in 3rd place. Invasion of the Body Squeezers. This brings me no joy into saying that this is the worst update that has came out of 2018. And you might be thinking, why? Allow me to explain. This was the first update that came into existence. Like, without this update, I would not be where I am today. I will give that credit. This update, when I first heard about it, I thought, wow, that's so cool. An update based on one of the more classic books out there? Wow. Yes, please, sign me up. I would love to do this. And then I played it. And then I got bored. And then I started to despise things about this. For example, the items that were included in this update were all fine. All fine and dandy. They were okay at best. They weren't bad. I enjoyed the theme of it. At least it fits to HorrorTown. I will give it that much. But one of the things that kind of, what do we call it, I didn't like about this update was the confusion of the crafting. You have to craft in the 2 shops, the crafting one down below, but then you have to craft in the Monster Diner, the Many Mysteries Club, and then back to the thing again. It's confusing at the point where to get the items you need to craft from different places, so it just becomes a colossal mess. And if I thought the biggest crime of this update that really irked me off was wasted potential. This update could have been one of the best alien-inspired updates. It looks so cool. But I don't know what the hell happened. They screwed it up so bad. One of the things that surprised me was they had in the promotion that there was this weird, what do you call it? I guess shrimp-like creatures that were supposed to be aliens, and they mentioned that, oh, they have freeze-rays guns. It's like, oh, just like in the books, like they kind of mention stuff like with the freeze-rays guns and all that type of stuff, right? And where the hell are they? They were in the promotional art. They were mentioned, but where are they? Did they not exist? Turns out later on, and years later, I discovered, yeah, they actually did exist. Why did they cut them out? It was obvious that these characters were supposed to be the thing, and then the big monsters, squeezers we know, they were supposed to be the boss monster, as it were, because they were doing this gimmick where, you had to pay for bigger monsters kind of deal. And then those were like the little minion type of things. I don't know why they cut them out. The other interesting thing about it, too, was that originally they had the monsters look like the one that Jim Kobus drew, but they decided to change it to be more crustacean, which I do appreciate. I like the idea of like, I get it. So Squeeze, so they're basically the monsters, sea monsters, like Cthulhu-esque eldritch horror that squeezes people, right? I get it. Funny. But what pissed me off about this was the main character we get, Fleshman. Now, Fleshman as a whole, it was interesting enough as far as a character. It made sense to have him be part of this update. Now, the buildings these characters come in are usually unique in some way. Fleshman, on the other hand, his building was no different compared to a single residence one. In fact, if you put him and the single residence together, you wouldn't know who was whose. And that is one big problem. You couldn't make it unique at all. You couldn't make it a little bit stand out. You couldn't be bothered to make it somewhat interesting. And I get it. You want to make it seem like it was just blending in like everyone else because you didn't want him to stand out in contention, because that was if you want to be smart, you want to be blend in possible. I get that. But you couldn't have give a little hint of some sort of strangeness. Like, you couldn't have added something else to the building to make it kind of go, that's kind of weird. Like, all the buildings look the same except this one. This one looks odd. This one looks out of place. No, nothing. And here's where it comes off as. The developers might say, well, he's trying to blend in. He's trying to be no different than anyone else. You know what that comes across to me? Lazy. Lazy as this lazy. You were lazy not to do anything. You didn't bother with anything. It makes it feel like you couldn't have done anything about this. This is wasted potential. This is part of the reason. Wasted potential. Made it confusing to kind of configure how to do everything. It doesn't give you anything else. And to top it all off, Fleshman himself was completely useless. To the point where he became the nickname Mr. Useless, because even after the event ended, he wasn't useful for anything. Nothing in the slightest. He was worthless as a character. He was above all nothingness. Why did you bring this interesting character, this interesting story, everything about it? You had a lot of interesting ideas. You had something there, and you screwed it up. You screwed it up. And it just pisses me off. Like, you had this, but you didn't do the due diligence, and you made it worse as a result. Now, mind you, nowadays they fixed They fixed Fleshman a bit, so he's not useless as he was before. But by God, the update that introduced him wasn't helpful at all. This whole thing was just confusing mess, and I got so confused that at the end I just didn't care. I completed the story. That was my obligation, and I was like, okay, that I'm out. And you don't want that. You don't want somebody like me to be like, I'm out. You wanted to kind of continue off to the end. But for this, I couldn't be bothered. Because, again, it's confusing how to get all the items you need. But how? Everything about it, it was, as a new player, especially, this was intimidating. So I kind of didn't want to play it. So I didn't bother. I bothered with this. And this is why it's the place that it is. I feel like this could have been best. It could have been the greatest in some way, shape, or form. But the thing is, this was the second event they released. How did you get from the first test event and come with this as your result? This pretty much showed that they had no idea what they were doing. They were kind of still trying to figure it out, but they backpedaled. Oh boy, they screwed it up bad. To the point where it didn't work at all. And it showed. But there's one thing I'll give this event anything. Although this had wasted potential, although this had some issues, compared to the other two, it's nothing but fantastic. Oh, yes. The other two, they are a whole breed of incompetence. So with that in mind, let's go to the second place loser. Welcome to Dead House. My god, what a way to come back from a god-awful update with another god-awful update. This had some interesting aspects to it. Out of any character, I think Compton Dawes had a unique personality to him. Out of all the characters, he was a great kind of villain. But 13 days, less than 2 weeks to beat something like this is ridiculous. Really ridiculous. I had no idea why they decided to go with this trend of having just 2 weeks. You have a whole month you could have just let this go out for. But no, 2 weeks, that's all you get. And this just made no kind of sense. All the items just seemed so incompetent. And then you get to one item in particular, 5,000 of the event currency. Or 50, I should say. There's no way someone can do that within that amount of time. You know what's also kind of stupid with this? I'm going to point out that during this update, it felt so like pity, like please, I'm so sorry, here you go. When you're playing through the event, they're giving you the amount of currency you need in order to get to the next item. Place this item down, costs 1,000. Oh, you completed the event, here's 50,000. Oh, now here's an item that needs 50,000 of the currency. So it just felt like they were just giving it away until you get to the end, which is another roadblock, because, oh, you need 50,000 type of thing. And then they learned from last time where they're like, oh, well, we're giving it to you as a weekend bonus type of thing. Like, you know, you can get it during the weekend. So you need to craft not only the grand prize, which is this flask item that kind of vaguely relates to the theme of Welcome to Dead House, but they just kind of just gave you this whole thing up front and personal. Again, the theme of it was interesting. I feel like the items they included could have been better. They brought back the ice cream truck for some reason. I don't know why, but they did. All the other items, I felt like, could have been better, but it wasn't. And Compton Dawes himself, coming into the game after the event of the last one that we had before it, didn't really feel the greatest. In fact, a lot of people had to question because they were like teasing. It's like, oh, Compton Dawes is coming. And he showed them his animation with his little wheelbarrow of sorts. And people were like, you know, after the last event, this is the last thing you want to see is a character coming in with goosebumps in a wheelbarrow. Kind of like making it seem like the company's out of touch with their whole thing. And you're talking about Mr. Useless when it comes to with the Fleshman. This guy takes the cake. After his event is done, those animations he got, guess what? Gone. Bye. Goodbye. Never to be seen again. They're gone. Forever disappeared. Never out in the ether. You'll never get them again. Except if you decide to get the Welcome to Dead House special book, which is a special bundle that you have to get a year later. And at that point, why? Get the exclusive animations? Really? What? You could... Why, out of all the other items, this one was so out of left field? It's like you saw what happened to your last event that you did, and you did not anything. You didn't learn anything from the last one. You didn't change anything. You didn't fix anything. You just kind of said, here it is again, except we just kind of fixed little tiny bits things there to kind of make it a little less of a crapshoot. But we're not going to extend it. No. 2 weeks. That's it. That's all you get. 2 weeks. And then after those 2 weeks, nothing. Absolutely nothing to look forward to for the next weeks. You couldn't just let it just go out for longer? No? Okay. Fine. Screw us, I guess. The items included, by the way, too, were okay for the most part. They were fine. But, God, you could have just made it so much better, but no. Oh, no, you didn't do that. You made this godforsaken update that I'm just dumbfounded to why you thought this was a great idea. But you did, and it was released. And now it's the second worst one that we have ever gotten thus far. And quite honestly, there's nothing else I can say that kind of comprehends with this. You know, besides liking Comp and Dawes, but that was just because of his character, not the actual character you own, the actual just character in the story. And then they try to loosely tie from the last update into this one. It just felt bad. Like, if they wanted to fix this, they should just cut this from the last update and pretend that one didn't exist, but they didn't. So now we have this. It's because it's attached to another update that just happens to be number 1, the worst one. And speaking of which, let's go ahead and go with the infamous one. The one that deserves them all. The hatred of everything. And let's go ahead and talk about it, because I think it's about time we talk about what most people think is the worst. Number 1. The worst update this game has ever gotten is... Say it with me now. Please don't feed the vampires. These words in the HorrorTown community has been feared for a long time. And for those fortunate souls that didn't get to play this when it came out in 2019 are just the lucky few. But for those who've played this, like me, know the horrors that come with this update and its infamy. For those who haven't played this update, allow me to introduce to you it and why it sucked majorly. But before I do that, let's talk about some of the things that it did good. The first thing, the theme from the book, making it more of a film theme, kind of out of left field, but okay. The items included were not that bad. It wasn't terrible. The prices were okay for most of them, but other than that, they were fine. Story was okay. Not bad. Not that great, but it was okay. That wasn't too bad. They introduced 2 characters, both cost $450, which means that in order to get both of them, you would need to get almost 10,000 of the currency, 900 Goosebucks. That's a lot of money for just 2 characters. But that's not the worst of it. Oh, no. This is not the worst of it. Let's explain
one of the issues with this. The first one. 2 weeks to complete this update. And you need a whole lot of items in order to craft this stuff. Not a lot of time. Their reasoning behind this, I have no idea. But their thought process was, hey, we'll give the characters 10 minutes to do their animations. Instead of taking hours, it's going to take you just under 10 minutes just to do everything. Wow, how convenient. No, you had to be on this game 24/7. You had to put in timers in order to remember to come back in. Because in order to complete this update with the amount of time you had, to micromanage everything was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. You needed both the characters in order to get the craft, to get any chance to get the main package thing that was needed for some of the items. But that's not all. Oh, no. As you know, they give you packs, they give you bundles in order to sell some characters. Now, I didn't talk much about the packs for the other updates because they were anything special. They were pretty much reasonably priced for what they were giving you, so it wasn't too bad. This update, on the other hand, introduced something that I have never seen before. So all the items you have gotten thus far from previous updates, usually you would get a pack for the character and a bunch of other stuff, some knickknacks, some items and whatnot. You would get them for, a few bucks. This one, though, $20. Close to. That is stupid. The overprice for what it's worth. Why is it worth that much? Now, mind you, this is my Canadian money, so it's like Monopoly money. So it's not as great as, say, Americans, but I'm sure Americans are pretty much in the same boat where they look at this and go, why so much money for such little things you get? But okay, let's assume you went ahead and bought the pack. Alright, good enough, right? They would have gotten you all the things you needed to get the character and continue on your merry way. No. Because it turns out in order to complete her quest line, you need certain items, and these items happen to be premium currency. Like, for example, the first item you need to get is a clock tower. 50 Goosebucks, please. That's a lot, but it's a little reasonable. Okay, fine. I can do that. Then we get to the next one, which was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like a street lamp, which was $5. Okay. Again, not bad, but getting up there in price, like 55 Goosebucks altogether. Then get to the last quest. You need a certain mausoleum. 150 Goosebucks. I think. I could be wrong. It could be 250 for all I know, but 150, it's like... What? You need an expensive item in order to complete this stupid questline with this character? And it doesn't do anything? Why didn't you include this with this in the beginning? They didn't. No, they didn't. Oh, but after the backlash of this update with the tasteful criticism left behind the company to know how much they mess up big, they, after the fact, then they added the pack that happened to have all the items needed in order to complete Yvonne's quest. But not in the beginning. Not when this update was in the thing. No. No. They did not. So that rubbed you off the wrong way. But okay. Let's say you didn't want Yvonne. Let's say you want to go for Fifi. Okay. You got Fifi instead. Fifi was okay. Alright, her pack was fine. She was decent enough for what she drops, and she helps a bit, so not too bad. And then you get to her last quest. Oh, look at that! You need Yvonne again. So even though you can get to the other character, you needed Yvonne regardless. So in other words, you needed to spend more than 1,000 Goosebucks in order to complete this entire quest line that was optional. I have never seen or heard of this happening again. And I can tell you from experience that this was when the new director came into play. And to say this guy had any knowledge of what he was doing is an understatement. He had no knowledge. He didn't understand any of this, because you can see this became one of the worst and most infamous of the updates. But it gets worse. You might be watching this video and kind of already knowing. I mentioned most of the items were plausible to get. Most. That was because there was an item that was made available that, as far as I can understand or recollect, was the most expensive event currency item offered to this date, with 80,000 of the event currency in order to get this stupid item. And it doesn't, and it is not anything interesting. It's not unique in the slightest. And the last update I talked about with the Welcome to Dead House had the same issue. How was anybody going to get this update? It was so bad that you had to, in order to get this item, you have to, I'll get to that in a minute. So you might be thinking, okay, fine, I'll get all the items, I'll just get some of the items. So you play through your quest line, and then, oh look, you get to the end. Oh, look at that! The item you need, the 80,000 of the event currency, is required in order to complete the quest. Oh boy! 2 weeks to get this and the grand prize and everything else, and you spent some money on this game? And you can understand why people were pissed off by it. You get to the point where they decide to go, we screwed up bad, I'm so sorry. Let me fix that. We're going to put up an emergency request for the last bit of the end of the event. We will put up this weekend where you get the item in question in the special request things they kind of have in option. Okay, all right. You're trying your best to complete it. You're trying your best to fix it. What is the requirements to get the items? Oh, the same fucking items you need in order to get the grand prize. In other words, do you want the grand prize item, or do you want to complete the quest line? Because you can't get both. And the only reason I was able to complete it was because I was warned ahead of time what was going on. They didn't say this publicly. Oh no. This was privately to the special Goosebumps power users. These people were the lucky ones. Everyone else screwed out of luck. Screw you. Too bad. But then, it gets worse. So all this stuff has happened. All these things have come to play. And you would think they would fix something. But they did it so half-assed that it just rubbed people off the wrong way. But do you want to know what really tipped me off? What really set this to the infamy line? What really showed the incompetence that this update had? This could have been great, but this alone showed what happens when you take someone who doesn't know how to do anything and screwed it up. Within 24 hours before the event ended, all of a sudden, 10 days, 10 extra days were added into the event. They didn't add it, these updates, they didn't add 10 days before that. They didn't add it when people were complaining about it. No, they added just as they've decided to... Okay, sorry, I just want to cut in here real bit. I'm sorry, I was running this for a long time that my battery is now starting to die, so sorry about that pop-up. Anyways, where was I? Right, so 10 days to complete this update, and what do you get from this? Oh, nothing special. Nothing special. Just everything about it just... You didn't do this when people complained on the first day. You waited until the very last moment when people were rushing themselves to complete it, and then all of a sudden, hey, guess what, everybody? 10 extra days to complete this update. You. No, really. You. This is why this event is so infamous. This is why this is considered to be the worst one. This is why every time, whenever an update comes in, that everyone should need to look at this update as a reflection, as a reminder of what not to do. This was so incompetently handled that it amazes me that this game lasted the way it did. This, for a lot of people, killed the game for them. And it didn't happen that the next update, Welcome to Dead House, didn't change anything. It's the second worst one. This just showed that this person had no idea what they were doing, and it showed. Because after that update was landed, he was having ideas of what to do. He was working on the Halloween update. He had an idea that he wanted to do when it came to the body squeezers, but he couldn't do that because of this whole thing that was going on here. So and then someone who had the brain, Pixowl, was just like, you know what? No. Out you go. Out you go. You're ruining this thing out there. You're ruining everything about that. And you know the story. Basically, I should at least thank him, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity that I did back in December with the Sakti drop dead. But, yeah. You can see why this update is as worse as it did. It was so badly handled that I was amazed that this lasted the way it did. It amazed me, if anything. This is by far the worst big update that we have gotten thus far. And it will always be that way. Let's hope for the future that this never happens again.
Okay, well, with that in mind, the worst is done. So that was the worst updates, big updates we had. Out of the first 23 updates we had, those were the worst, in my opinion. Which means the next 10 we're talking about is going to be the best ones, the greatest ones, the ones that I feel like were poster childs of what you should do as far as updates are concerned. And I'll go more in details and be more happy and more gleeful about this updates and be gushing over all the stuff they did right and what they could have done, achievement, and all that incident more. But this video has gone on long enough already, and I've already sprinkled some ads on the way in here, so I figured, let me just take some moment, take some time, relax, kind of a bit, because the vampires, oh boy, it's brought back bad Vietnam memories. But I digress. When we come back, we'll be talking about the last 10 updates and why I feel like they were the best of the best. Until then, I'll be seeing you very soon. You take care now, and remember, learn from the histories of the past, or doom to repeat it.